Hi, so I have Henry Yuk with me today. He's one of the stars in Gong Lum's Legacy. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's good to be working.
So I've been doing some research on this play. I know it's based on historical events. How would you describe the play to someone who is interested in going?
Well, it was inspired by a 1927 Supreme Court case, Gong Lum v. Rice, which was an attempt by a Chinese Mississippi grocer in the 1920s to desegregate the white school, the local white school at least, so that his daughters could go to a white school and not the so-called colored school.
Mhm.
It won on the very local level, but it was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. And 1927, the Supreme Court ruled that it was not discriminatory against the family and the children in white school because they had the option of going to other schools.
Mhm.
But that is really the backdrop for the story of the play, which is really about the relationship between a young Chinese man and a local young Black school teacher,
Mhm.
and how they have to deal with the social and cultural pressures of the times. I mean, this is Jim Crow South in the 20s. They're dealing with very strong cultural issues from the Chinese side, and they have to deal with what they can do versus living with whites and living with Blacks in the community. So it's really about them as much as it is about the time and the place and everything else.
Mhm.
It's not really like a bio play about Gong Lum specifically. So it gives, I think, a sense of what it was like to live and work in that time period with all those different kinds of pressures.
And what attracted you to the play?
Well, it basically fell into my lap. A friend of mine was, I don't know if he was offered the part, but he was offered the play to read, and he read it and he felt that he wasn't really right for it. He recommended me. I read it, and it came together very quickly. What I liked about it was that it touched on so many historical pieces that you hear very little about. We may be somewhat more familiar with conditions for Black communities during the Jim Crow era. But number one, nobody ever heard of Gong Lum v. Rice, not even lawyers. It's not taught in law school. Two, the idea that there were Chinese grocers in Mississippi is another little known fact. And they were there from the late 1800s. So it's not as if they just suddenly appeared in the 20s. They had been there for quite a number of years. So that and some of the historical information provided about Chinese immigration, I think was also a positive for me in reading the play, because it touched on things that a lot of people just don't know. And it shed light on all those conditions and what Chinese immigration was like during that period. And this is before, I mean, this is during the Exclusion Act, which was 1882, and it continued on until I think into the 60s, before it was actually appealed. And some people don't even know what the Exclusion Acts are. So all that information I thought was quite relevant and good for an audience to learn without being totally didactic and bashing them over the head with it.
Mhm. As you mentioned, the play touches on stuff that's not taught in law school, that's not taught in history books, period. Um, with this play talking about this part of history, especially since we're in a time now where there's clearly a lot of hate, a lot of animosity, a lot of racism going on. How do you think that learning about this history can like help uh maybe not erase, but like keep some of this, or I guess erase, I guess I should say that. Like how can it help erase some of what's happening right now and make people aware of the fact that uh Asian Americans, belong here just as much as anyone else?
Well, I think the fact that Chinese and other Asian Americans have been here for a long time, not all Chinese or Japanese or any other Asians had just showed up yesterday.
Mhm.
There's a history of Chinese in America going back to the 1800s. And when you talk about generational uh, things, you've got families that have been here for several generations. So it's not like just because you're Chinese or you're Asian, you're a freshly landed immigrant.
Mhm.
And how does that change the viewpoint of so many people because they think Asians are not as American as other Americans because they look different. Maybe they have an accent, but they've been here. They've been a part of American history for a long time. Yes, there was a big influx in the 60s and 70s from China and from Asia, but there were Chinese here going back to the 1800s. So how do you account for that?
Mhm.
And that, in fact, some of those Chinese don't even speak much Chinese anymore. So are they less American because they look different?
Mhm.
No, they're as American as apple pie and chow mein. I mean, it's just a fact. So get over it,
Mhm.
really. And to be scapegoated and all this anti-Asian hate stuff has been promulgated by people who are just inclined to be divisive.
Mhm.
Um, you can say that, well, some of these people have mental health issues and all. Does that explain every incident? I don't know.
Mhm.
But before this period, there wasn't any huge rise in personal attacks and injuries.
Mhm.
So, it's trying to put the blame on people that are blameless. So I think the more you know about history, the more you know what's come before us, the better context that you have,
Mhm.
so that you can understand what's happened before. It's history is not what's happening just right now. History happened before, and it will continue. And
Mhm.
you need to know the context of all of that
Mhm.
and its place. So it's good to know all these things. Some of it is not happy.
Mhm.
Some of it is quite rewarding and exhilarating and all that, but some of it is very messy and unpleasant. And I think there are too many people who want to ignore it because it's so unpleasant. And it
Right.
shines a light on the perpetrators of that. But that's the way it was. So you can't ignore it.
Mhm.
So just learn from it.
Mhm. I wanted to touch on something that has come up in this interview. You were talking about Mississippi Grocers, and that reminded me that I had watched last year Far East Deep South, which is a documentary on which you
Right.
probably know about. Um, and I interviewed the director of that movie as well, and she was talking about how she didn't know about this side of her in-laws family that
Mhm.
that happened, and the interplay between the Black communities and the Asian communities. Um, I think even I think with that, and with the fact that uh, this part of history came before Brown v. Board of Education, and one is talked about and one isn't. I think all of that kind of like is part of the like a push and pull relationship between the Black communities and the Asian communities. There's a lot of overlap, and then there's like a lot of people trying to figure out how to work with each other, but there's also ways to work with each other that have been shown throughout history. So I guess with all that said, especially since it's in the play too, with the romance aspect, um, how do you see um, this kind of push and pull between the two communities in your eyes? How does it affect you?
Well, I mean, in terms of the play, it's trying to understand each other and to be able to live together, um, rather than trying to reject each other and trying to beat somebody else out.
Mhm.
I think essentially everybody's in the same boat. So you're not going to solve the problem by blaming it on somebody else, but you can solve the problem by trying to work together.
Mhm.
I think we've seen it here more recently, past couple of years, of demonstrations and the Black Lives Matter and anti-Asian hate things, how groups have come together to support each other rather than pointing fingers at, oh, look who's beating us now.
Mhm.
So I think that's important. Um, and I think that the play really tries to get people to understand that you don't have to berate or be apart from other people. Doesn't mean that you necessarily have to marry somebody,
Mhm.
but that you can still have an ongoing positive relationship. And part of what historically happened with the grocers was really that they were able to be successful because the white community didn't really want to deal with Black community in terms of business. So if the Chinese grocers could serve um, Black neighborhoods, that's fine. It didn't bother white grocers at all
Mhm.
because they didn't want to do it. The Chinese didn't have a problem with it, and they were actually um, much more helpful to their customers because they would actually provide credit, whereas white grocers wouldn't.
Mhm.
So there are positive aspects to all of that. We can be friends. We don't have to marry, but we
Mhm.
can be friends and we can work with each other.
Mhm.
Um, and it's pointed out in the play, the Chinese, they didn't want to be white and they didn't want to be Black.
Mhm.
But the two communities didn't really know how to deal with that. Well, the Chinese aren't white, but they're not so-called colored either.
Mhm.
Even though it is pointed out, if you're not white in the South, you're colored,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
But the Chinese didn't see it that way. They just, we're Chinese.
Mhm.
We're not white and we're not Black. So we're here and we just want to do our thing and we're not trying to beat anybody else about it. We just want to make a living and live our lives.
Mhm.
And if some of that crosses over where there is intermarriage, okay. And those who approve will approve, and those who disapprove will disapprove. which is the case in any kind of relationship. I mean, even within groups,
Mhm.
right? Oh, you're marrying some guy from the South? Nah, I don't like that. Or you're
Mhm.
marrying somebody from the North? I don't like that.
Mhm.
So there's always some kind of division about that. But I think the play tries to put a positive spin on making things work. And that it's not easy, but if you want it and you want it badly, you have to work at it.
Right. And I guess, speaking of working at it, you have to work with this cast to create this play. What was it like working with the cast and director?
Well, I've never worked with Elizabeth Van Dyke, the director. The rest of the cast members are all new to me. It's been a lot of fun with everybody. I did do a show with New Federal Theater, 1982, about Chinese immigrants coming to Angel Island
Mhm.
in San Francisco, called Paper Sons. And it was about that immigrant experience, which is mentioned in our play. It's always fun working with young, talented actors. And they're all young, believe me.
Mhm.
I am way older than everybody. So it's always a nice thing to meet new talent and to get their take on how things work and the give and take between actors. And the thing about theater, it's totally collaborative, because you spend so many weeks, so many hours working with each other, and you try to refine a product, and you're trying to attain the same goal.
Mhm.
So it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Great. And I think I have time for one last question. Uh, what would you say to someone who, I guess, has seen the play and they want to know what they can do next? They're inspired to try to be a part of, this ongoing civil rights discussion, about, common humanity. What would you suggest to help them get started on their path?
Well, I think trying to become more involved and not just throw up your hands and say, oh, it's so pointless. My vote doesn't matter, that kind of thing. So I think you have to be as involved as one can be. It doesn't mean that you have to go to every single protest, march, rally, or political meeting, but it means to stay involved, to stay on top of the information that's being disseminated, because right now, these days, much more so than years ago, there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Mhm.
And you have to really comb through all of that. And so much of it is common sense. I mean, some of these conspiracy theories out there are so wild.
Mhm.
How could you possibly believe this stuff?
Yeah.
And if you read something or you hear something, step back for a moment and think about that. Is this for real, and who are you getting this from?
Right.
So I think you have to be more attentive, because of all the social media and because of all the news reports from segments of the news media that is trying to be more divisive rather than reporting the news accurately.
Mhm.
So be attentive and get involved. That's about all we can do. I mean, do we want to pick up arms and rally against the forces of evil? I don't know that we do. I don't know that we're at that point.
Mhm.
But you just can't just sit back and let it all happen.
Right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with me today. It's been so great learning more about the play. Um, how long is the play running for?
We have 3 more weeks, Thursday through Sunday. We close on April 24th.
Okay, great. And it's at the New Federal Theater.
It's a production of the New Federal Theater. It's at the theater at St. Clement's, which is on West 46th Street in Midtown. I guess it's really Hell's Kitchen because it's between 9th and 10th Avenue. There is being worked, and I think they're starting to promote it now, like an Asian and Black theater night, April 16th. So we're hoping to develop particular audiences, and we're hoping to bring in interested groups to see the play. And I think it's the more people we can get in, and it's word of mouth. So people see, oh, you really should go see this play. So that's all we can hope for. And theater is totally ephemeral. You know, it comes and it's gone. It's not a movie that you can watch on DVD or streaming. So, and what happens after the 24th? Don't know. We're hoping that it'll have a life further down the road, but there are no guarantees, and we just hope for the best for the run.
Well, to everyone watching this interview, y'all heard it, that this is in the ether, so like go and see it. And I'm hopeful that everyone who comes to see it gets something from it. And I wish I could go see it myself. I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, but I will be there in spirit, I guess, to support. And I'm so glad to have talked with you today. And congratulations on the play and good luck with its run.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.